is my review for the 2015 film Blair Witch, directed by Adam Wingard. This is the third film in the franchise, but the first proper sequel to the original. Blair Witch 2 was in its own weird side universe. I've completely disowned that film, if you've seen my review. In this one, a character called James Donahue finds some weird footage uploaded online that he thinks might have come from his sister Heather's camcorder from back when she was in trouble, and he's desperate to find out. So he takes a group of friends and all the latest camera equipment, including cameras that you can wear on your head and drones that you can send up in the sky to look around, and they go into the woods to try and find her, or at least find out what happened to her. Now, I don't think it's giving much away to say that these guys do not find a 40-year-old Heather Donahue living in a shack like Jason Voorhees. That would just completely crap all over the first movie. But actually, while I'm talking about spoilers, I will just say that I will be talking about most of the stuff that happens in this film during this review, although I will leave alone the last 10 minutes. I won't go into what happens in there. So I've kind of got one foot in spoiler territory, one foot out. But let's actually start with the ending, and I'll just skirt around the details somewhat, because the ending in this film is probably the one thing I think in Blair Witch 3, as I'm going to refer to it, that actually improves over the original. And that's high praise, because the ending in the first Blair Witch Project is one of the classic horror endings. You've got Heather and Mikey exploring this house, and they can still hear Josh outside. They're getting really panicked as they head down to the basement, and then they get knocked out. The events at the end of Blair Witch 3, I think they're even better. It's fast-paced. It's in with the whole spirit of the Blair Witch universe. There's this incredible twist at the end, and it's just a real thrill ride for these 10 minutes right at the climax. Earlier on in the film, there's all these other good ideas as well. So I talked about in my review for the first movie this idea that the Blair Witch can sort of shape the woods, so that if you try and leave the woods, you'll just end up turning around and heading back the way you came somehow. That concept comes back in this movie, but the writers have added in all these extra new creepy phenomenon that happen as well. Like the characters wake up in one scene and realise that it's pitch black, even though it's the middle of the afternoon on their watches, for instance. I mean, being lost in the woods would be one thing, but to be lost and it's just permanent darkness, I mean, that's something else. There's also this idea that two characters that branch off from each other, when they're reunited, one will think that it's been 5 days since they saw the other, whereas the other one will think it's only been an hour. I first saw this concept in a film called Cube 2, Hypercube, actually, but it's really good to see it introduced into this film world. It's really, really clever. The drone, you just know that drone is going to get sent up at one point to look around, and they'll see nothing but woods and get really freaked out about it, because they're expecting to see a road or a house or something that's going to help them get out of this situation. But it was predictable, but still scary at the same time. In the first film, there's this scene where the characters come across this clearing with all these weird wooden stick things hanging out of the trees. In this movie, we see some more of those stick things, but outside the tents when the characters wake up, and it's a really scary moment, especially as it's dark as well, even though it's like 1 in the afternoon or something. And it kind of sheds new light on what might have been happening in the first movie, because I look back now at the original film and think, was that a campsite where all those stick things were hanging, and maybe the evidence of where people have camped has just been blown away or something? One caveat I will add is that sometimes the film feels like it's a bit too overstuffed with all these ideas. It's trying to squeeze into its 90-minute runtime. Often I just want the film to slow down a little bit. I mean, what was so great about the first movie is it took its time so much. I mean, even though it's only a 78-minute runtime, the original Blair Witch Project, it's so nicely paced. You really get to feel this slow descent into the madness that the characters go towards. But in Blair Witch 3, it's just clipping along, really, really fast-paced, just getting through all these ideas. And I'm thinking, just take 1 or 2 of them out and that would be better, Specifically, I think this one idea that this girl steps on this sharp thing in this stream, and then she sort of develops this parasite in her foot. I mean, that part did nothing for me in the movie. I think they possibly could have lost that. Now that we're sort of moving slowly into the negatives, I will say as well that a lot of the character fates, we didn't really need to know how some of these characters died. One of the scariest things about the original was the fact that you never found out what happened to Josh. In this film, 1 or 2 of the characters go off and die away from the group, and I think, well, you don't need to show that. It's just leave it a mystery. There's no character fate in this film that is left unturned. We find out what happens to everybody, and I don't think we needed to find out what happens to everybody. It's not like they're going to get these great, gory slasher movie deaths, because it's not that kind of film. At best, we'll see somebody sort of dragged away from something unseen off camera. We don't need to see that. Another thing I'll add is that there aren't as many instances in this film where the characters are in their tent in the middle of the night listening to all these scary noises from like 80, 100 yards away. I mean, that was one of my best memories of the original movie. It was so scary, that stuff. In this film, there is some of that, but it feels usually like the noises are coming from like really close in, like 20, 30 yards away, really loud and in your face. Maybe that was intentional to make it even scarier, but I'm not sure it's successful. There's this one scene where this guy goes off for a pee like 50 yards away from the camp, and suddenly things are crashing all around him. It's really close in, and he's in a real catatonic state of fear, not knowing where to turn or where to run. But I still think it's a much scarier concept, this, when the noises are a good distance away, 100 yards or more, and you're not sure whether that thing is then going to come towards you. Now, something else I wanted to mention, and this is more an observation than a criticism, but this film abandons any pretense that there might not be supernatural things going on. If you watch the first movie, you could, if you wanted to, interpret the whole thing as being just sort of clever rednecks running around out there and terrorizing these three people, and there isn't actually a Blair Witch. You could make that interpretation, but in this film, all that goes out the window. We actually see supernatural things going on right in front of our eyes by certainly the halfway point of the film. But I think most people will come away from Blair Witch Project 1 thinking that it was the Blair Witch or the Rustin Parr Ghost anyway, so it's not a massive deal. In terms of the characters in the film, they're mostly very good. The two leads, played by Callie Hernandez and James Allen McCune, I've seen these two before. I've seen Callie Hernandez in Alien Covenant, though I couldn't remember that. It was only when I checked the cast list after the movie that I realised that she'd been in that film. And James Allen McCune was apparently in The Walking Dead, but I don't remember that either. It has been a while since I saw The Walking Dead. I did like the fact that in this film, there are 4 characters to begin with, and then it turns into a 6. So it starts as a 4, and then they pick up these 2 sort of stoner characters, and they've got a different agenda to the main 4, and that leads to some conflict during the movie. It's good that there's some conflict there, because in the first film, there was definitely a lot of conflict between those 3. They didn't know each other very well, and they got into all these arguments over the map. It must feel, by the way, that I've mentioned the first film a lot during this review, but I just don't think there's any other decent way to approach reviewing a sequel to a masterpiece 14 years on than doing the comparisons. There's no other way around it. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why they took so long to make a proper sequel to that film, is that they were too afraid to try and make something and have people compare it unfavorably to the first one. Right, shall we get to the Bag of Terror and find out what sort of score I've given Blair Witch? We've got 1, 2, 3, 3.5 bloody axes for Blair Witch. That's a good score. I think it was always going to come somewhere between 1 and 2. It was never going to be a masterpiece like the first film, but it was never going to be a dud like the second one as well. I think this is a good film. It's frustrating in some of the things it didn't quite get right. This could have been so much better, but as it is, I still enjoy it. Certainly in the future, whenever I do go back to the Blair Witch Project, I will always follow it on by watching number 3 as well. So there we have it. There's no pin for the horror location board today because we've already done Burkittsville with Blair Witch 1 and 2. That concludes my review trilogy for this. I think there might be a TV show in development, and I think it would be a good fit, this, for a TV show, a limited edition run, sort of a 6-10 episode thing, a bit like The Haunting of Bly Manor, that kind of tone. So we'll definitely have to keep an eye out for that. If it does happen, I will definitely watch it and review it. But other than that, I will see you for another review another time. Bye-bye.